Alright, we're going to pick up where we left off in the previous video, and before we move on to the paint room, I first want to cover the usage of hotkeys for invoking the freeze brush, because as you're sculpting, you can not only switch to the freeze brush by hitting your hotkey, but if you hold down the hotkey, just like in Photoshop, it will allow you to temporarily use this tool while you're pressing that hotkey. Okay, and as soon as you're done, you let up, and now you're back in the tool you were working with. Okay, again, hold it down, make your freeze selection, let up, and you're right back. So I'm going to undo a few times here. Alright, so let's try one other technique, and this one is probably a bit better, and I'll tell you why. So we're sculpting here. We decide we want to use the freeze brush. So without moving our cursor away from the action and without losing your train of thought and focus, you can just tap the hotkey. Okay, make your selection. And this one works a little bit better than the sticky key, because with this one, at least you can go back and modify quickly, with your shift key to smooth your selection, or hold the control key. Okay, you can't do that with a sticky key function. But the good thing about this is just tap your hotkey again, and you're right back to the tool you were working with. Okay, so I'll go ahead and deselect. The other thing I want to point out is a few quick tips here for creating freeze selections using your brush alphas. You can use your stamp draw mode. And so this allows you to just click and drag, and then you can rotate while creating this. And another good option is using the Moveable Stamp. So as I'm pressing down, you can see a preview. Just click and drag, and with your bracket keys, you can increase the size or decrease it. And just above that, the 9 and the 0 key will allow you to rotate it as well. Okay. So just let up, and it will apply that selection. So I'm going to use my bracket keys. I'll leave that intact. And we'll go over to the paint room now. What we want to look at is using 3D Coat's cavity painting capability to apply freeze mask in the crevices or the raised areas of our model. Let me go to the freeze brush here, and I'll choose a regular brush alpha. So what I'm going to do is go to this drop list option here, more in cavity, and if I wanted to do just the opposite, then I would choose less in cavity, and it's going to paint on the extruded areas. Okay, so more in cavity. By default, you'll see something like 1, and if I try to start painting here, I'm not really seeing anything. Also, your freeze degree will be 100%, but you can always click on that to add a higher numeric value. But the point I'm trying to get across here is you need to adjust your cavity scale so that you see more of this within the cavities. You may notice that with the freeze brush, and when you have the cavity painting option chosen, you don't really see a preview like you do when you're in the paintbrush or the airbrush. You got this little preview window, and all I see is a blank panel. So what's going on here? Well, as I mentioned, if you adjust the cavity scale upward, then you can see greater coverage in those crevices. And once I'm happy with the amount of coverage, I can switch back to the freeze brush and proceed. What I can do is crank up the freeze degree, kind of an excessive amount, and I also want to increase the cavity scale. Let's try about 14. Okay, now it's really obvious, and that's what we want. Still, if you have to do this brushing by hand, this can take a little bit of time. However, we can use any one of these selection types to select the entire object and apply this. So let me go ahead and choose a rectangular lasso. But first I'm going to uncheck ignore back faces so that I can select all the way through the model. Okay, so we'll go ahead and choose that. And you notice I already have a freeze selection from what I worked on in the voxel sculpting room. So it's interchangeable. Whatever mask selection you paint in the paint room with the freeze brush, it will work for freezing in the sculpting room and vice versa. And we can save this as well. But what I'm going to do is go back to the sculpt room here. And if I want, I can smooth this a bit, either locally with my brush, undo, or from the freeze menu, choose smooth freezing. Okay, so let's try the shift brush here maybe. I'm going to come over to my brush and stroke options and return this to 0 or 360, whichever. That way my brush alignment is straight up and down, vertical. Again, this is a pretty dense mesh. If I zoom in and hit the W key, you can see it's really dense. So that's one reason why there's a little bit of a delay. And plus, I also have remove stretching on. So if I turn that off, it should speed this up a lot. So this is a really great way of creating dragon scales and things of this sort. All right, so I'm going to deselect. Now the next thing we want to do is look at using the fill tool in conjunction with freeze selections. You have an option here, fill with freeze. So here in the tool options panel under modulation type, by default no modulation is chosen. So you come down here and you can choose different types. Noise, Gaussian noise, wavy surface. You have to adjust your scale. It stops when you drag the slider, it stops at 0.1, but you can always change that to a lower value. Let's try 0.05. 1 there we go. So you got a number of different presets you can choose from, and then you can choose a custom texture, right? And this allows you to locate an image file that you want to utilize as a procedural texture, and 3D Cut will try to apply it as such. It's going to use cube mapping as its default. Now, if you're working on a low polygon model with UVs, then you could choose UV mapping if you want. But in this case, we're working on a surface mode model, so we don't have UVs. All right, and you can adjust the edge contrast and so on, as well as the anisotropy. Okay, I'm going to turn use color tolerance off, and I think that's it. So let me go ahead and hit layer. I'm going to click no for now. I want to point one other option, and that is clicking on object, and this will allow you to select the object you want to apply to. So yeah, let's go ahead and hit layer. It's asking, do you want to apply to the entire layer? Yes. Okay, so now that we have this created, let's go over to Sculpt Room. And I'll go back to my gum brush. Bring the depth value down to about 3 or 4. Switch to a brush draw mode here. And I'm going to choose invert tool because that's all I'm going to do on this part of the model. So I think this is an even better option than using a stencil with the cube mapping. I think it blends it together much better. Okay, so you hit Control D to deselect. Alright, and as you can see, it came out pretty good. So definitely give this technique a try from time to time. And with that, we will bring this video demonstration to a conclusion. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.